Hi, my name is Jane, and I am a data viz designer from Toronto, Canada. Today I'm talking about how self-employed data visualization designers make a living. I previously worked at Kantar. I was a data designer. Kantar is a market research firm based in the UK, and I was working at the Toronto office. I left my job last summer, so 2019 summer, I left to pursue freelancing. Towards the end of 2019, I felt quite lost, no direction, and started to think a lot about how do I make this work. I started to ruminate. I was going in circles. It wasn't very healthy. So I need to do something about it. And I heard this really great tip from a TED Talk. Um, it said that to address rumination, the best way to do it is to turn that into a question. Because when it's a question, it's something that can be solved. And so I decided to do that. And what I did was I asked, how do self-employed data visualization designers make their money? I addressed this question and turned it to four designers. So I talked to these four: Ali Turbin, RJ Andrews, Anki Emery, and Matt Baker. I wrote about my insights in the Data Visualization Society publication called Nightingale, of the same title. And this talk will expand on this article, and I'm going to include a couple more insights I didn't mention there. So this topic is very much not talked about. It's very much behind the curtains. And the way I've structured this talk is to target people who are earlier in their career, who are considering freelancing, whether part-time or full-time. So I'm just going to quickly start and go over the kind of work I do. So I generally consider my work in two streams, and this is a recent development. I'm constantly changing, but currently I have two streams. The first is Viz the World. And what I mean by that is I want to do work that integrates data viz into everyday life. So beyond reports, beyond dashboards, can we do more with data viz? So the example I have here is, and this is a personal project, is I integrated data viz into a food menu, which allows people to quickly compare food items and help them make a choice. The second stream is data documentaries, and I approach data documentaries as a way to gain insight into the human condition. And I think of it like a film documentary, except it's condensed through time. And personally for me, what I did was I wanted to document my mental health and physical health, and I did that for 3 months. And so this is the project for that. And I wanted insight into how I can live better, because I had a lot of muscle tension reacting to stress and anxiety, but I didn't know what to do about it. I tried to seek help, but it wasn't very helpful. So I collected data on that, and I gained a lot of insights. A lot of it was actionable. So one thing I learned by being very present with the data and collecting it was, one feeling I felt was overwhelmed, and that was a feeling I was never able to identify before doing this project. And so that's a very important part of this, and it allows me to build this self-awareness, which is actually very hard to do. And so these are the main two streams of work I am doing now. So I'll talk a little bit about everyone I talked to and why they started what they do. So first is RJ Andrews. He is a data storyteller at Info We Trust. He started doing freelance graphic design work and in marketing as well. One day, he had a friend who asked him to do an ambitious data story project. He decided to publish it online, and that's when he created Info We Trust website. So you probably know him from Info We Trust, the book he wrote, and also Creative Routines, which is a very popular piece of work he did. And I think the key thing to learn here is that it's important to show the work you do. So he published a lot of his work on his website and helped him build a lot of brand awareness. And the key thing here, I think, is it actually eventually paid off. So in the summer of 2015, he was moving to San Francisco, and he got two unsolicited jobs. One promised $30,000, the other one promised $20,000. And he was going to go to San Francisco to get just a normal tech job. But with these two requests, he saw it as signals to, in his own words, forget working for a big company, keep chasing this dragon. Ali is a data visualization designer at the American Enterprise Institute, and she's also the host of a popular podcast called Data Viz Today. Ali was originally a software tester and a data analyst for government clients. When she was working there before, she welcomed a new family member. She had a child, and she had to stop working. And during that time, she was reflecting on how to re-enter the workforce and what to do that maybe something that she would enjoy a bit better. And one thing that she came to the conclusion of was data visualization design. But she has no background in design or data visualization, right? She comes from an analyst background. And so what she decided to do was start her own podcast. So she started Data Viz today. And she created this incredible workflow where she was able to build a network. So she reached out to people to talk about their process. And what she would then do is apply that and so that she can incorporate it, she can gain those skills. So she would apply the things that she learned from people she talked to. Here's an example of what she made after speaking to Sonia from Studio Terp. I think what she did was she was able to teach herself all these skills through her podcast. One thing that Ali mentioned to me during the interview was she says you're what you constantly think about. And I think what that means to her was she didn't let her lack of experience stop her from doing what she wanted to do. She said, I don't need to ask anyone for permission. For her, it was enough for her to think about it, to really want it, and surround herself with data viz. What she used to do was she would cut, things off of Washington Post newspaper and put it in her notebook just so it was there, so she could think about it. And I think there's a lot we can learn from how she approached her career. Matt Baker, he is Canadian, like me. He is a designer at Useful Charts. He makes these massive posters that he sells to educators around the world. So lately he's been doing a lot of family trees. In 2009, he returned from Sri Lanka. He was teaching English abroad. He returned to Canada. And he was recently divorced and he had young children. So he was a single father and he was unemployed. And he needed a way to still work and take care of his children. So what he decided to do was learn how to build websites. He learned HTML. He set up Google AdSense, and he started his online business. So he started doing various things. And what I find interesting about how he adapted in terms of work was he adapted around his family. And this comes to an important point. So in Chinese, there is a term called 下海, which actually translates directly to entering or descending into the sea. People in China would say this term kind of casually to say, I'm starting a business, or I'm starting something new, and leaving something like maybe leaving a salary job, something that's a bit more secure. And I think this metaphor is very much denoting this idea of risk, unknowns, right? There's a lot of things that might not work out. And it's very, very scary to start a business, right? It's never easy. And I also think there's never a really good time to do it. There's no right time to do it. I think in the case of Matt, he probably did it a little earlier than he was ready for it because of his circumstances. And I asked him, do you think if it wasn't for your situation, would you have started to do what you did? Would you have started to learn how to build an online practice, an online business? And he said, I've never thought of it like that, but I think maybe you're right. I think I would have just found a job in the city somewhere and I wouldn't have started it right then and there. But I think RJ would have started it. I think Matt would have started it anyways because he has that entrepreneurial drive. Anne is the last person I spoke to. She is a speaker and trainer at Depict Data Studio. She comes from the evaluation world. So she helps her clients, turn charts that look like this into something like this, which is a lot more accessible, a lot more engaging, easier to read. Anne's story is really interesting. So she and her husband were traveling one summer and they met a retired couple living out of RV. So the husband of that older couple did consulting and worked part-time. And Anne turned to her husband and said, someday when I'm retired, I want to teach people data viz. I'm going to work through my career right now and then retire and just do this thing. And her husband just laughed at her and said, why not do it right now? And so I think that was the very first step for her to do what she's doing now, which is putting her dreams into words. And I think that's a very scary first step because it takes a lot of courage to say what you want to do and commit and follow it through. But there's a chance that it might not work out, right? Even for myself, when I was saying, I just mentioned how I do Visit the World data documentaries. A couple months ago, I couldn't even say that. I would just stutter because it just sounded ridiculous. And I was just like, this is not going to work out. It's going to fail. But when I finally decided to commit to it, regardless if it works out or not, I feel like a sense I can move on with it and try it out. So I think that's what happened with Anne. She put those her ambitions into her words, and she executed on it. Income. So I had a very narrow perspective on how one makes money in data viz. I thought I had to be very service centric. I thought I had to get clients. But I'm learning that after I talk to everyone, it's not like that. There's a diversity, many ways to earn an income as a data viz designer. And so I asked everyone for their income distribution for 2019. So RJ, he's mostly freelancing, so he does long-term projects, short-term projects, and speaking in workshops. So long-term 60%, short-term 20%, speaking workshops 20%. Ellie, so she works remotely and part-time for American Institute while she's still raising her young family. 70% comes from that, 20% freelancing, podcast 5%, speaking 5%. Matt Baker is the most interesting. Most of his income comes from poster sales alone. Of course, he's spent many years building that practice, but it's interesting how he's not very diverse in terms of how he makes his income. And 10% comes from YouTube ads. NK Emery, 50% income, in-person training, 30% online courses, 16% webinars, consulting, keynotes, 4% digital products, YouTube ads. She's probably the most diverse and most well-rounded of everyone I spoke to. Income stream. So I think when I was trying to understand or like a certain model of how people can make money in this field, I tend to have these two in mind. So for service or product, to provide a service, you need a specialized skill. Usually this isn't scalable. You do this one-on-one with a client, for example. Once you have some experience and you have developed and honed the specialized skill, I think then what you can do is provide consulting, teaching, or speaking, and you can build this further and start building out products. So products are more scalable. So you can build digital or physical products. Digital would be things like courses, webinars. Physical would be things like books and posters. And I'll say the additional form of income, which is more common now, is content. So create podcasts, YouTube, and through that you can make money through affiliate marketing, Patreon sponsorships. So RJ, very service heavy, very service specific product. He has a book, so that's where the physical will come in. Physical product comes in. Ali, she has a mix of service and content. She's got a podcast, and she also still works freelancing, also at American Institute. Matt Baker, I would argue that you still need a specialized skill to still make these physical products, but he doesn't offer this as a service. He just focuses on product. And he also has a YouTube channel. And he has 200,000 subscribers. He does really well for himself. NK, the most obviously well-rounded in terms of income streams. She does a little bit of everything. So this is, I think, really, really hard for anyone to know. Like, we're really good at knowing what we're not good at. We're really good at seeing our weaknesses as people when we self-reflect, but we're not really good at seeing what we can do well. And I think it's just human nature, right? You more like criticize yourself than congratulate yourself. And I think to really find out what your value is, it really depends on working with others and listening to feedback. What do they tell you they value? What do they tell you that's helpful? So I still don't really know what my value is, and I'm still working through that. But I asked the people I talked to what their value is. So before I go into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by value and how to define it. So generally what you have is a customer segment. So a customer would have customer jobs, so not in the sense of pay job, in the sense of what do they need to do every day, day to day. So there's certain set of things that need to get done every day, and there's certain things that get in the way. So there's pains that get in the way of getting that done, and there's certain gains that can help get that done. As a provider, as a business, you create things that will allow them to have these gains or things that can remove these pains. And I'm going to give you a really great example. So in Ontario, we have these freshwater turtles. They're called blanding turtles, and they are threatened. That's their status right now. And their main job, I think, is to live long enough until adulthood, mate, lay eggs and produce offspring for the next generation. I think that's their main job. A big pain for them is habitat segmentation. So what that means is, there's lots of roads built around where they live, and it becomes a problem because when they try to cross these roads, they're going to get killed. So they can't, if they get killed, they can't do their job. They can't, lay eggs and produce the next generation, right? A gain would be they would like to have is be able to get to where they need and get there safely. So one way to address this are these little tunnels. So these tunnels, you can they've been built under some of these roads, and it allows these turtles to cross safely so they don't die and they can do what they need to do. And so I think as providers, we need to understand what is the value we offer and why would be hired for our work. And I'm going to give you a a quote I heard from Elijah Meek. So he at the time was he had a call, set up a call with a lot of early career people and talk about how to build a portfolio. So he was online with Susie Liu and Jason Forrest, and he had this he mentioned something about value, and I'm gonna quote him. It's very long, but it's important to read through it. 5 or 10 years ago, it was very challenging to make some of these diagrams and some of these maps. And now there's an enormous number of extremely well-designed and extremely powerful tools, and you hear quite often engineers or data scientists say, well, why should you do that? Why simply have a position that does that when I can make a chart in Tableau, Superset, Plotly in 5 minutes? Why have an entire job for data visualization? I would challenge all of you as you consider this as a career to answer that question, not necessarily answering the skills you have right now, but answer it in this sort of way. What are you building toward? Why is it that you think someone like myself can be successful in these kinds of careers? Because it does take more than technical skills to build one of these things, and it does hit on all of these ideas of design, collaboration, and being able to bring some sense of systemization, addressing questions by stakeholders. That's a classic answer why design is a real profession and not just something that automated tools can take care of. Because I'll tell you something, they're not going to get less automated and less sophisticated by the time you spent 10 years in data visualization. They'll be 100 times better than they are now, and that question will be 100 times harder to answer. So I think it's important to acknowledge what he says in terms of what's to come. And when I asked RJ and Anne what they thought their value was based on their feedback from their clients, none of them mentioned any technical aspect of data viz. So RJ, he said one of the most, underestimated or underrated value he gives to his clients is the general skill of consulting. It's he calls himself the coordinating mechanism. He helps his clients focus their attention to a goal, get them on the same page. When I asked Anne, she gave me an example. So she was teaching at this organization, a workshop, and one of the employees walked up to her almost in tears saying, I've worked here for 20 years. I've worked here for a long time. It was always so stressful working with data, but this is the first time I feel excited to work with my data. I think for people who don't have any data skills, working with data is a huge pain to get their job done, right? And what Anne does is she makes that process less intimidating. She wears fun t-shirts. She has these fun stickers on her laptop to make data less scary, to make it less intimidating. She makes it more fun. And both of them, none of them mention any technical aspect. I think it's important to have the technical skills, but I don't think that's enough, especially if you're self-employed. Their value is dealing with human problems, not technical problems. It's very much about dealing with people. And I think that's something that we have to understand as providers, as freelancers. But that's the problem with that is it's really hard to show it. So, I did this to you earlier on, right? I just showed you my work. I didn't talk about my process. But how can we show the value we give? Because the value isn't this. It's not what you see it's not what you see. It's what I do to get there. That's where the value is. It's the questions I ask you to help you solve problems. Upon writing that article, this article, an idea struck me, which is it's important to expose how you think and not just what you can do. It's important to show what you can do, but that's not enough. There's a saying in the startup world, or people who do investments in businesses, is bet on the jockey, not the horse. And the idea is, I think, it's important to see who is going to be behind this idea, how they would execute it. And same thing as freelancers. The work we make is important, but not as important as who we are. And we have to show that. We have to show how we think. And I think Anne does this really well. So she has been blogging since 2012. She shows her thinking, what are some things she's been thinking about. And you realize her work is quite complex. And you start to realize, it really requires an expert to execute on this. So here's a couple of posts I pulled from her website. And you can really see how she can give you value, right? She shows she talks about some of her insights and ways to approach certain things. So after I talked to everyone, what did I do? So I tried to do this more lately is create these videos. So I would try to expose how I think. So for example, recently I was trying to learn how to create a data viz style guide. Never done that before, but I decided to learn how to do it for the first time. And I decided to record that process of learning how to do that, and I publish it online. And I think what's helpful for people when they see this is they see how I think. I talk out loud, and I think that's very valuable because they see how I solve some problems I'm encountering. Here I'm recording, behind the scenes. I use a lot of post-its, but you don't see that, right? A lot of people will just look at the final thing, but they don't see the process it takes to organize all this information and try to make sense of it, try to build a story. And so what's great about video, it's a very good way to create a relationship almost passively, right? I don't have to ever see you to build a relationship with you. You can see my video and develop a sense of trust in me and see how I work and sort of understand if I might be the right fit to help you do what you need to do. I'm very realistic about how I earn my money, and I'm very transparent about it. I talk about it as well. I'm very open about it, and I had a very narrow view, right, on how to make money in data viz. But when I saw how everyone else was doing it, I was a little bit more open about how to approach it. So I'm going to show you a matrix about how I understand this process. So I know where my level of work that's ideal for me, and I know what's not ideal for me. I'm also very conscious and aware of what's low in demand or high demand within the market. So for me, like the two streams I mentioned earlier on Visible Day documentaries, these are new things. These are things I made up, right? There's no demand for it at all. No one knows what it is. No one knows the value. But for me, it's something I want to do. And I think to move this a little bit more here towards this direction, towards more demand, it requires a lot of education, a lot of concept testing and proofing. And that's just something that's going to take time. There's no way around it. Dashboards. So this isn't really ideal for me. I got 3 requests for this last month, and I turned them down because there's something I can do for it. I don't have the skills, I don't have the talent, and I don't have the interest for it. So for me, this is high demand, and I recognize this, but for me, it's not ideal. And it makes sense that this is very high demand, right, in terms of the infrastructure for dashboards and the problems they solve. And for me, I'm at the point where I'm trying to compromise. So social media. So I'm a social media strategist, and that's where I engage professionally the most, and that's where most of my income comes from right now. Presentation design. So I used to do a lot of reports when I was at Kantar, and this is something I think is still close to data viz world, right? And it's still something I can do and contribute. And for me, being at this place, I'm quite happy where I am right now in terms of being realistic and also trying to pursue and develop this a little bit more, this idea a bit more. I think I'm still in the middle of the dabble year that Anne calls. So when she first started her practice, she had a dabble. She tried a bunch of things to see what would stick. And I'm a full year yet when I left my job. So I'm still in the process of exploring. When I first was starting out, I did social media on the side for income. I had some experience, but very little expertise. And I knew that to increase my value and also my hourly rate, I had to educate myself. I had to discipline myself to learn. So what I did was I started working just 4 days a week. So Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday was when I worked. Wednesday was the day I didn't work. And I told my clients this, I'm not, available when focusing on learning. And this day I will learn things. I will read blog posts, I'll try to learn how to do, I learned SEO, I learned Google Analytics, I learned a bunch of things. More recently, what I've done is I've cut down a little bit of social media work, and I'm trying to focus more on data viz. So now I'm thinking a bit more about data viz stuff, right? And recently someone asked me a question as, what is data viz design? And I was like, oh, I don't have a really good answer for them. Let me get back to you on that, right? And so I spent that Wednesday to articulate my thinking and my thoughts and really, discipline myself to articulate. And I created this Instagram carousel post, which tries to answer that. So now if someone asks me that again, I have a more articulated answer, and I've thought about it. I spent the time to think about it. And I think this is important because if you want to develop yourself into an expert, I think it's important to hone our thinking. So it's really hard to stay motivated, right? And I think I'm still trying to grasp how I want to contribute to the data viz community. But so far, there are 2 key things that keep me focused. The first is I want to create results that only data viz can achieve. And if we communicate through film, essays, or poems, why data viz? And I think this is an important question everyone should ask, right? Is data viz, does it make the most sense to use that right now, and why? The second thing is I want to keep making things that only I can create. And I think there's no point in making something that someone else can make, right? And this is something I'm working really hard to figure out. And it takes some time, right, to just keep exploring, trying to make things. And the key answer to this is really to just be yourself. I think a lot about personal branding, especially when I work with my clients. And surprisingly, it's really hard to be yourself. We always want to be someone else. But when you look at people like comedians, musicians, artists, they all succeeded by being themselves because they have ownership to their story. They have ownership to some skills that only they can do and no one else can do. And I think if I can figure out how I can do that, and I think not only will I discover my value proposition to the data viz community, but ultimately I think I'll find my value proposition to the world. Thanks so much. So that was my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. You can learn more and visit my website at janezang.ca. My social media, mostly I'm pretty open, so feel free to reach out. Thanks so much for your time. Take care.